iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hello and welcome to the iHeartPodcast Speaker Series. As you guys know, we love to get together every week, talk to some of our favorite creators, podcasters, producers. And today's conversation comes with interesting timing because there was a story just last week by NBC News talking about the shifts in podcast listening and what listeners are looking for. It's been really interesting to see this because, as the story said, people are looking for things that they can find comfort in. They're looking for many things that sort of feed that desire for nostalgia. And this category of rewatch podcast has really taken off in the podcast space. It's exciting for me to be able to talk about this one today because we're talking about a show that takes those of us from Gen X back to our teenage years. And this is one of those shows that takes us to a very specific place and time that we can all think about. And it's just so much fun to go there. And I'm excited to talk today to Jennie Garth and Tori Spelling. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Hi.
All right.
We're happy to be here. You want to talk about nostalgia? We're here.
That's right.
We're
That's
here for
exactly
it.
Right. Well, I am loving it. We are in
We're like a fine casserole. Your comfort food. We're here.
Like a fine cast. I like that. So before we jump in to the podcast specifically, I like to ask a lot of people this. So I know you guys have unfortunately just plowed through COVID like so many of us over the past few weeks. Thankfully, you guys are doing well. It sounds like your families are doing okay. Putting that aside for just a moment, I'm curious to hear from you guys. Have you discovered anything recently that you've been binge watching or binge listening? Any recommendations, either through your COVID experience or just any time during this pandemic? Maybe Jennie, I'll start with you.
I just stumbled upon, I think it's 1880 something. It's a show. It's a Western with Sam Elliott and Faith Hill and Tim McGraw. I love it so much. It's filmed in Montana and I can't get enough of it. It's so beautifully shot and there's something so calming about it when you feel like you're there on the trail to Oregon with them.
That's awesome. We can all use that for sure. Tori, how about you?
I know I'm super late to the game, but finally found Euphoria, which is so great. And definitely watching it through the lens of, us as teens being on a drama and now watching the modern day teen. And you know what? I'm grateful because back then we didn't have to do all those naughty scenes. Everything was real PG.
Is it? I heard though that it's not is that what it's really like? Because I only saw like a few minutes of the first episode and I was like, whoa, I don't know about this.
Is that
how it is?
Like in real life? Oh yeah. I was like, I don't know.
We'll have to ask our teenagers, right?
It's definitely like modern day teens, they just, because of the internet and social media, and they know so much more now. And it's just, it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's terrifying at times to watch having teenagers, which I know, we're all dealing with this, but yeah, it's a lot. It's definitely not a calming show, but it is a fantastic show. It's we've actually used these times having two kids that are now old enough to watch shows sort of like with the whole family, talk about being late to the game, of even going back and watching, certain shows, like whether it's New Girl, whether it's Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like some of these shows that we might have watched, a few years ago. But I will say my daughter, my 15-year-old, now has a new favorite, Beverly Hills 90210. So it's been really fun to introduce her and to have her going through it as well. And it holds up incredibly well, which is one of the fun parts about this. There's a lot of shows that don't. And so this is really fun to do. But so let's dive into it. So we are looking back, 30 years ago since the show premiered, and just thinking about the fact that you guys have been such close friends for that period of time. Thinking back to the cast bonding early on, there was really no model for how a show like this would come together for kids that age. In fact, I heard you guys talk about in the first episode of this season, like who could you have turned to tell you what this experience would have been like? Who could have been a mentor? You guys were sort of joking and we were like, would it have been Joey Lawrence? Like, who would this have been? did it feel like at that point that you guys were doing something so different than had been on TV before? Or was this just like, oh no, we're just jumping in, this is an acting gig and this just all feels natural? What was that first experience like when you first started working on the show?
I mean, it definitely, I think looking back, we now know, and we knew years into it, but I think at the time we didn't know. I mean, it's one of those experiences as an actor that when the show ended, it was like, oh, every show you do, a pilot, it gets picked up, it runs 10 seasons, cool. And then all of a sudden, unfortunately, like in our late 20s, we were like little birds leaving the nest and like, wait, what do we do now? Like, what happens? It was just it like struck gold.
Yeah.
But just seeing people's reactions, we would start to know, but we were so in it was hard to see. I feel like people around us would notice it more than us.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really knew what we were doing, what we had gotten into. It was just our lives at that moment. And it seemed like we were always at work. Like when I think back to it now, I don't remember like real life, like what was happening in my real life. And it seems like we were just sort of fitting real life in the cracks, in the moments, the free moments, because we were at work like, 16 hours a day.
Wow.
And so it just got so blurry, like what was real and what wasn't real. But the show felt so real, and the environment that we were in, it was just so consuming.
I had forgotten, just in looking back recently, reading up on the show, trying to remember a few things about the origins, that the show didn't immediately take off. Like in season 1, it wasn't a mega hit overnight. And, the smart idea on behalf of the show's creators and obviously Fox to give it a chance to, run a season through the summer when nothing else was running new episodes, and it started to just like catch on. So even though I understand this idea of you guys sort of being insulated from it a little bit, was there some point though when you started to realize, wait a minute, this is striking a chord, like this is really catching on? Maybe Tori, I'll start with you on that.
I mean, I can clearly remember the first time people freaking out when they saw me. Like I remember being in a mall, being on an escalator, and people were screaming Donna. And I was like, oh, that's funny. I only know one other Donna. That's the character I play. And then I'm like, oh, it's me. But I don't think I ever knew like, oh, we're addressing teen issues like no one's done before. We're showing this great bonding experience these kids are having. Like I didn't get it on that level at that point.
Maybe that was the beauty of it though. Like maybe that was why it worked, because we were so innocent and so sort of green. And I feel like I wish I had known then the importance that the show would have to so many people and for so many years, because I don't know, I guess I feel like maybe I would have done something differently or had, more of an opinion about things, because then I was really like just doing what I was told and, learning as I went. But I feel looking back, like what an impact that show had. And thank goodness it was good, that I'm just so grateful that we were part of something that was defining to so many people.
Absolutely. It's definitely one of those, like I was saying before, one of those shows that you feel like you just remember so many specific times and places in your life where you'd watched episodes before. This was one of those shows when we mentioned to our staff internally that we were launching the show, because we have so many, Gen Xers on the team here. I don't know that there's been a show that got this sort of response when we said, like, guess what, guys, we're going to get to do the rewatch for 90210, just that excitement around it, that immediate nostalgia. And I do think there is something too, especially during the time we've lived through these past couple of years, of having that connection to better times, of previous times, of times where we weren't thinking about a pandemic. And curious to hear from you guys, just like when you decided to start the podcast, what were you hoping for? Like, what were you wanting to get out of this, and why did you decide to do it?
I was just personally hoping to remember some of it.
Yeah.
Like that's been the gold mine for me, is like going back and watching it. Cause I know you probably know this, but Tori and I never really watched the show from the beginning to the end, certainly not in sequence like this. And we sit down every week and we watch a full episode, and really this is the first time that's happened. So it's been like treasure trove for me just to see all the things and the memories that come back, and like, just the sheer like appreciation for it.
Definitely. Yeah. We became fans, and that's the first time, like, we've had so many different experiences over the years since this show started, and especially together, but becoming like true fans for the first time, it was like, oh, that's cool. We get it now because we're watching it with complete, like, we're just fangirling and being like, oh, we love this show. We would watch it if we weren't in it.
And also, like, when you're in it and you're on the show, you're in it, you're like that character, you can't really see big picture of like what the other characters are doing and what the storylines are doing and how they're weaving together as a whole. So now watching it back, I mean, the gift has really been to us. We did this show for the fans of the show, but honestly, for me personally, it's been a gift for myself to be able to go back and like relive something that was such a whirlwind, but was such an amazing time in my life.
Yeah, I do love hearing the reactions from each of you when the other shares something that you don't remember necessarily. And so I'm trying not to spoil it for any of our viewers or listeners here, but a story that I heard Tori tell just the other day. And Jennie, I don't think you knew about it. It was an experience that involved sort of a flirtatious relationship in your teens, and that experience there that was just like, what a wild story to think back on those years and to now be parents and thinking about what kids are going through. What is it like sort of thinking about this show? And maybe, Jennie, this gets to the point you made earlier of like wishing that you could understand the sort of magnitude of the show to so many people. But how has it changed your perspective on the show to be now watching and talking about it as parents? Tori, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
It's really cool. I mean, I'm always the first to say when my kids were little, I would show them scenes and they knew Jen and they didn't know me. And I was always like, I don't look that different. But now, like, I have 2 teenagers and I'm watching the show, and like my son is a year younger than when I started. And it's so
wow.
The issues definitely hold up, we know when we see a phone in the house or, a car phone, or we use a word that's so dated. But other than that, like, I love my kids watch it. I know Jen has this with her husband and kids too. Like, if they're around and I'm rewatching the show, they'll watch it with me and they get really into it. Which makes me really happy. And of course, the fashion, my daughter's always like, oh my gosh, wait, that's in fashion now. And I'm like,
yeah, we did that. How about you, Jennie?
I don't know. For me, it kind of makes me a little bit sad because, like we were talking about before with Euphoria and the programming that's out there now for this age bracket, it's just there's so much going on, and it's so advanced, and like watching this, it's like everything was so much more simple. It's not like I'm watching Anne with an E or anything, but it's still just, there's an innocence about it, even in the exploration that these teens are going through and learning about themselves. And for me, that's just like, oh, I just wish that's the way it was still for the kids these days.
Yeah, I could see that. It's like you guys were dealing with all very real issues, like that. It's not to ignore that, and heavy issues, but those things exist regardless of what the outside influences are as a teenager. So whether you want to talk about, conflict or sex or any of those things that teenagers are thinking about and having to deal with at this time. But then at this point, these added layers today of whether it's social media or just constantly being connected to the rest of your peers, like it was a reminder there. And we've talked about it as a family watching this. It was like teenage years are hard enough without all of these other external influences. So I can only imagine as you guys sort of watch it with that lens, how different it must be. So,
but it did have such forward thinking. And we noticed that every week there'll be something that'll come up and it's like, whoa, that stuff, that was so topical now. And it wasn't 30 years ago, but it's
Absolutely.
Like 90210 was delving and touching on things that was way ahead of its time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Well, let's talk about the rest of the cast. Has this been an opportunity for, it seems like you guys have stayed close over the years, but what's that been like, sort of having new conversations again about the show and getting to reconnect with everyone and sort of talk about that experience together. Jennie, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
It's great for Tori and I. We love talking about old times and like all the lessons learned and the memories and everything. It's kind of tricky though, because it's an area that's delicate for some of the other cast members. They don't necessarily want to keep talking about something they did 30 years ago. And Tori and I kind of see it differently, and I think have a little bit of a different perspective, just that, that show was so important to us, to me, and there's never a time in my life where I won't want to talk about it and relive those things. So it's, we wanted to really be able to connect with the cast, and we have gotten to some extent, but it gets a little tricky and a little gray for some people, and we have no other choice but to respect that and continue forward in their honor and with in the honor of the show and our love for it.
You just gave me such good chills. I got chills when you were saying that. Yeah, we're grateful. I mean, I know people want to move on and do other things in their career, but it's like the fibers of our characters and 902 are intertwined in history and nostalgia and the being of everybody's lives. Like we're there somehow. Like, and it's nice to think about that. And we don't feel like we're like, oh God, we're just rehashing old times. I mean, think about it. If you have high school friends and you see them again, you rehash old times.
Yeah.
Like we just did it on a bigger level.
Yeah, that was your point of connection. And there have been a few though that you've been connecting with for pretty much the first time since you were together, almost 3 decades ago. Is that right?
Well, we had the chance to see like the core cast when we did BH 90210.
Right.
That was definitely the first time some of us, especially Tori, was seeing some of our old castmates for the first time in a long time. But we've gotten to really delve in and explore a lot of our supporting cast that we haven't heard from, don't know what's happening with them, where they live, what are their families like. It's been really fun to sort of go back and then fast forward in that way.
And hear their memories, like their experiences being on set and, who they worked with and what it was like. And we just love those little tidbits.
I think you really can't talk about 90210, Tori, without talking about your dad as well, and knowing that experience of creating this show and then making this show with your dad. I'm curious along the way, knowing that you were so young jumping into this, whether there's any memorable advice from those early years, knowing that, again, now you have kids that are around the age that you were when you were on the show. Anything that stands out as just like advice that he gave you along the way as you were going through this?
Well, he always said, because I mean, people were talking about us and a lot, there was good, but there was also bad, which meant that we were relevant and and I just remember the first time I was in a tabloid and it was really negative stuff and false information. I was really upset. And he was like, babe, if they're talking about you, it's a good thing, bad or good. Just make sure they keep talking about you. And I've always listened to that.
Yeah,
so
that seems like good advice. That makes sense. How about for you, Jennie? What stands out, not necessarily advice wise, but any of the challenges that you might have dealt with at that point? Were there any learnings from your experience, which is obviously in some ways so different than the average teenage experience, but at the same time, I'm sure there were a lot of challenges that you probably faced that you can hopefully impart some wisdom on your kids. Anything that stands out that you've been able to share with your kids from your experiences on the show?
I mean, I feel like you don't know who you are at that age, I feel like sometimes I don't know who I am at my age. And so just being able to be really real with my kids and this is just showing them where I came from and all the things I've learned along the journey and showing them that that's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out. It's just going to unravel before you, and you got to ride with it.
Well, before I let you guys go, any thoughts on, what's coming up in the podcast? Of course, this is an amazing season to be jumping into. We talked about this before we came on, to be able to talk about season 3 as things really start to get good and juicy here. But anything you guys are excited about, or any teasers for what's coming up in the episodes ahead? Tori, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
Well, we're not there yet, so I'm not sure. But if I remember correctly from what I have seen over the years, the college years, at least a film, were my favorite.
Yep.
So I'm super excited to get to those, the college years. But we're just hitting our stride. Like everyone's looking so great this season.
Yeah.
I feel like you can tell, at least, well, because we know, but looking at it, I'm like, I know these people are real friends, like in real life. The chemistry it's not like you just can't imitate that. And I think nowadays you see so many young shows and you feel like, are they really friends in real life? They're saying good actors, they're great, but like, I don't know. I always wonder about that. If it had been different, like, I think that's what made it so special is that we had a real connection and, those were our brothers and our sisters and they still are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can see that just in the podcast space, like the best podcasts truly are with people that their connection is obvious. It's not just that they're great performers or great podcasters or smart people or good communicators. It's sort of all of that, but that connection whether it's finishing each other's sentences or just feeling truly in sync with the way they talk about things. Jennie, maybe I'll close with just asking you about that, of like, what has this experience been like, being able to make a podcast where you look back on such interesting times with one of your best friends?
I mean, it's been a learning curve for sure. We started out a little rocky for me personally. I didn't know what the heck we were doing, what we had gotten ourselves into, because we just love to, hang out and talk and reminisce. And then all of a sudden there was a lot of pressure surrounding that. So it became a little bit more, delicate, but it's been, like I said before, just really a gift to, be able to do this with somebody who was there and who saw things from the same perspective, but at the same time, a different perspective. I mean, just today on the podcast, this will happen from time to time. Tori will say stuff that will give me, goosebumps and bring up emotions for me that I didn't really know were there, and vice versa for her. So it's all those little moments and those gifts that we get to share together and now with everybody on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, it's what makes a podcast great. We really love hearing it and appreciate how much time you guys are dedicating to it now. It's a blast. It's a fantastic show. So you might've talked about it being rocky early on. We of course never heard that in terms of like
it felt rocky
doing the podcast, but it sounds fantastic. And I would encourage
no one says we're going to take a break like Jen does.
That's right. You nail it.
So she might've thought it was rocky, but she nails that.
You nail it. We all know that what's about to happen is in fact the break. So, so well done. But thank you guys. For all of our viewers, all of our listeners here, make sure to check out 9021 OMG. It is such a great rewatch podcast and such a great chance to listen to two fantastic friends talk about some great memories. So thank you guys for spending some time with us today, and good luck with the rest of the season. Tori, Jennie, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll see you again next week.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.